Welcome to Peninsula Seniors Out and About. Today we're at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance for one of their celebrity lectures. Let's go see what Cindy has for us today.
Welcome everyone to the Western Museum of Flight. I'm Cindy Maka, the director. James Michener, in his 1953 novella, The Bridges at Toko-Ri, had the admiral in command of the Naval Air Forces fighting in Korea contemplating his pilots and asking, "Where do we get such men?" He was referring, of course, to the kinds of ordinary Americans who seem to come out of nowhere, perform extraordinary feats, and then continue to lead regular American lives. Our nation has always seemed to produce these extraordinary performers whenever we have needed them. Today, we are privileged to have such an extraordinary performer who has come forth many times in many places whenever America was in need. His name is Don Oldis, Lieutenant Colonel Don Oldis, and he will, in his ordinary way, share some really extraordinary experiences with us. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce to you Lieutenant Colonel Don Oldis.
As she told you, my name's Don Oldis. I'm 88 and a half years old, 88 and a half years young because I'm still working as a real estate agent. And I was a pilot in World War II and Korea and Vietnam. And I'm also 100% service-connected disabled. Things that you can't see, just problems that come up over all the years. All you guys probably are somewhat disabled anyway. It looks like a lot of you are my age, so that's good. And a little bit about who I am. I've got 9 children. I got 14 great-grandchildren, and I have 8 great-grandchildren. One of my great-grandchildren is going to be in a movie with Tom Hanks. I think it's called Saving Mr. Banks. It'll be coming out in September. She is the Snow White at Disneyland, and they selected her to be on the movie as Snow White in the story about Walt Disney, I think. So that'll be coming up. I've been in and out of the Air Force several times. Also in the Air National Guard, Air Force Reserve. I moved to 3 or 4 different states, and first thing I do is go out and make sure I'm going to be able to fly out their airplanes. But they flew different airplanes, so I was a fighter pilot for 20 years and a transport pilot for 10 years. So I flew quite a few different airplanes. I went in 1942, got out in 1972, and I flew 15 different airplanes, including some of them, and this are not all of them, but I flew the P-38, P-51, P-39, the F-80, F-86, F-84, and of course, most bases that I won all had C-47, so that was our workhorse, so we all learned to fly the C-47. And then I flew the 119 at Riverside, 121 out of Cheyenne, and the 124 out of Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma. And one of my jobs, which was nothing to do with the airplane I'm going to be talking about, was the PIO officer, Public Information Officer, for a newspaper in Riverside. And under my command, I was the head of a group of people. I had David Nelson, Ozzie and Harriet's son. I had John Wilkes' son, and I had Mike. One day I asked Mike, I said, "Mike," he was my first sergeant, and "What do you do for a living? You're a civilian. What do you do for a living?" He said, "I'm a movie producer." And I said, "Oh, come on, really? What do you do?" He said, "No, I produce movies." I said, "I'd like to see you produce one." They said, "Yeah, come on down to Paramount Studio." So I went down to Paramount Studio. My wife and I went down there, and we went in. He greeted us. We're sitting in the room, and I said, "Mike, you got pictures of John Wayne all over the place. Do you know him?" He says, "Yes, my father." So here I was having him get coffee and running around like he was the servant sometimes, as you do when you're in the military. So But anyway, nice guy, died 3 years ago. Let me tell you a little bit about why I'm here today. Is, as you probably know, the war, after World War II, our government, actually I think Truman was in there, and they wanted to demobilize everything. So we went down to, I think about, we were down to 200,000 troops, and the bad part, Russia was growing to 10 million troops. So they were getting bigger, we were getting smaller. And they even disbanded or got out most of the Navy guys, like 276,000 Navy, most of all the battleships were gone or put them in cold storage, and most of the big ships were gone. They also got rid of most of the fighter pilots, so consequently, Russia had a lot of World War II experienced fighter pilots. We didn't have too many. So the Air Force had a problem. They didn't have enough to really combat Russia if there was an emergency. So they did what a lot of you guys have been involved in. They called up the Air National Guard outfits, and they called up the Air Force Reserves because we were still flying. Actually, the Air Guard and the Reserves flew more than the Air Force, and we still do. We did most of the hauling, I think, or a lot of it into Vietnam. And our pilots had one advantage over the regular Air Force. We could fly unlimited. We weren't restricted to 100 hours a year, so we could fly 1,000 hours a year if we wanted to. Why the arrangement was made, I don't know. But anyway, so they called us to active duty on April 15th in 1951. I was based in Sioux City, Iowa, and there were 27 of us. I think there's a picture coming up. There's 27 of us that were in the outfit, and that's the P-38 I flew in World War II, but my favorite airplane. Anyway, there may be a picture of a whole bunch of us that were pilots, and then we had a lot of enlisted men. And I'm right up there in the middle up there. Anyway, of that group, only 3 of us are still alive. The rest are all dead, and which is a shame, but we're getting old, you know, old and older. And we can remember what happened 60 years ago, place. We can't remember what happened tomorrow, or yesterday even, so. Anyway, one little thing that was kind of interesting, I'm getting a little off from the speech I'm supposed to be doing, but I got to drag this out a little bit. Is when I went into service in 1942, I went down to Omaha, and they were going to weigh in, see if you could get in the cadet. My dad was a soldier in World War I, and he wanted me to get into the Air Force, so I did because he was in the Air Force in France. And so everybody did all the IQ tests, which passed, and we had to get weighed. So when I stood on the scale, I weighed a whole 123 pounds. Really, really heavy kid. The poor recruiting guy says, "I'm sorry, we can't take you into the cadet program. You got to weigh 130. He says, "But if you won't tell anybody," I said, "I got something might work." He says, "Go out and get you a bunch of bananas and a gallon of water," he says, "and go out and come on back." So I did. Got me a gallon of water, got me a bunch of bananas, ate them all up, come back and weighed 133. So I couldn't button my pants. I had to hold my pants together. And the guy was really nice. It was really, shouldn't have done this, I know. So he said, "Hey, you're in." So that was it. So I went into cadets and went into Santa Ana Air Base, and then, of course, we divided up into pilots and bombardiers and navigators and all that stuff. And so everybody wanted to be a pilot, and everybody wanted to be a P-38 pilot, just like they wanted F-18s and things over smaller jets here. So I was lucked out, went to a place called Santa Maria, California for P-38 trainings. But before we did that, actually, we sent us for P-39 training. Why, I don't know, but I guess I guess they wanted to make us appreciate the P-38s, because the P-39 was the worst airplane you could imagine. You couldn't even taxi out to the end of the runway. They had to tow you out to the end of the runway. And then you had to be careful when you were flying it, because you could get into flat spins and all kind of problems with it. And finally we went to Santa Maria, and we were there for about 3 months training P-38s, and then we went overseas. I was sent to AT-2, which is the chain. It's about 1,800, 2,000 miles from Anchorage, and it's 200 miles from Russia. So we were close to Russia. We were stationed with a bunch of B-25s that were bombing northern Japan. And then I got out of the service in 1946, joined the Air Guard, and went on. Okay, now the Air Force, getting back to the Air Force again, the Air Force had the desperate need for pilots, but we really weren't trained in atomic bombs. Most of the atomic bombs were carried by, in fact, all the bombs were carried by the bombers. And so they came up with a plan that they're going to take a fighter plane and make an atomic bomber out of it. So they picked the best one they could get would be the F84 Jeep. It didn't have a lot of range, but it would carry a big load. Didn't have a lot of speed. It could only go to about a Mach 87, I think. And so consequently, we were a little bit restricted on how fast we could go. We couldn't go far. Now, we trained there, and then after World War II was over, then of course we got back in the Air Guards. And when they called us up, they sent us down to, it was actually CIA headquarters at Langley Field. So we went down to Langley Field and started training in the F84 Jeep. They were in a hurry to get this done because they thought Russia had made a threat that they were going to come in and take over West Berlin when we were there. We didn't have pilots, we didn't have troops, we had no way really of stopping them. So they devised this plan: let's use fighter planes, let's use jets, and make an atomic bomb with them, and maybe we can hold Russia off. And it worked. We all went to England. Oh, before that, we went to atomic bomb school. Now, I got to tell you something about the atomic bomb. By the way, here's the F-84. Here's the airplane we used. And they put a bomb under us, and you think the atomic bomb was a huge, huge bomb. The atomic bomb that they used in Hiroshima weighed about 9,000 pounds, and it was about, I think it was about 15, 17 feet long. It was big, and called it Little Boy. That's the one in Hiroshima. Now, this is the size, it looks like a softball. It's really the size of the nuclear in an atomic bomb. This is as big as it gets. This is bigger, 5 times bigger than the atomic bomb that was over Hiroshima, because we made a plutonium bomb, and I think they had a uranium bomb, big boy. So we had a powerful bomb sitting under us. So anyway, most people think the atomic bomb is a huge, monstrous thing. It is huge, but most of it is explosives and wrapped into, ours was wrapped into a fuel tank. It looked like a fuel tank. And everybody we went to England, and in England they sent us to 2 different bases. We were based in a little town called Braintree, Wethersfield, north of London. And if you were over in England, you probably had some experience with some of the bases over there. Now, England didn't want the atomic material, the atomic bombs on their property, on their land. So we had the bombs. We had, they call it the shape. It was actually the bomb. And it was shaped like a fuel tank. So we didn't want to upset everybody that carried this big fuel tank around. So the bombs were kept back in the United States. And we would have alerts, and we would practice flying the C124 with the atomic bomb in it. Actually, it was a dummy. It looked like a little cylinder, looks like a thermos jug, basically, because the thermos jug actually would go in the back of the bomb, go in a little railroad track up in the bomb, and then, of course, the high explosive would center around it, and of course, when it went off, it boom, and off it went. So we divided, we put us at Braintree, and I think, I'm trying to think of one of the other bases along the coast. They had 35 of us in each of the bases, and then we would practice war games. They would be 17, 15 of us. We'd fly to a base about 50 miles away because Russia itself had us zeroed in at our base, and if the war started, they also had atomic bombs. They would destroy us right away. So we were 50 miles away in a secret bases, and we'd go there and we'd play war games. And they'd take 350 enlisted men. They'd go over and set up tents and mess halls, and the shape, the bomb itself, that carried the atomic bomb, was stationed at the secret bases that we're at. We didn't carry them around when we flew, just as flying around Europe. And they would fly those over, and then we would play war. We'd go ahead and load the bomb on the airplane, and then off we'd fly. And usually we'd try to fly up pretty close to Russia just to let them know we're serious. And after about 2 years, the threat was over with Russia, and then the Air National Guard part, we went home because we were on a 24-month basis. So since the war basically was winding down over in Korea, we went back home again. And now you'd think the mission was over then. They kept the mission going. They ended up getting 100s, then they ended up getting jet fighters, and they finally ended up, I think, with the new F-135s out there, or 35s. And so consequently, they're still, I think the bases are still there carrying atomic bombs doing the same mission. So let me read a little of my notes here so I don't bore you too bad with it. As I told you, we had 75 pilots and 102 pilots, 75 airplanes. Now the F84 was it didn't have the power and the range of the F86, but it was a better airplane to carry the bomb. Now, I also flew the F86, F84, F86, some of the jet fighters. And then as I got up older and older, I finally was able to get into transports. And but in the meantime, we would practice dropping our bombs. First off, we would get down to practice going down to Africa. And we would try to do high altitude bombing. So we'd come in at about 20,000 feet, dive down to about 14,000 feet, and we would actually drop a bomb. We didn't have the nuclear in it, but we did have the actual bomb, so it would explode, so we could tell where it was going to hit. And it didn't work out. It didn't work out too well because we could not actually escape the blast sometimes, and that was a little bit dangerous. So they decided they better put us on the deck and teach us how to fly a bomb, release it right over the target, and get the hell out of there. So we went into a low-level training mission, and we would fly treetop level. And when we got to our IP point, we had a little machine, not very big, that would fit on the airplane, and it would take control of the plane. So when it got to the IP point, we would flip on the switch. It would go into this automatic system, and it would fly the airplane. The airplane would go up about 8,000 feet or so, and it would release the bomb. The bomb would go on up to maybe about 18,000 feet, come down. Now we're going like hell to get out of there because we don't want that blast getting us. And it worked out pretty good. So that's basically the way we were going to go through Russia. Russia had, of course, radar like we have. So Russia had a lot more airplanes and a lot more threat, and they had a lot of anti-aircraft equipment, so we wanted to stay away from all that firepower, so we just stayed on the deck. A lot of our missions were one-way missions, and they would tell us these are one-way missions because we didn't have air refueling yet. They were working on it, but it was 2 years before they had tankers that could refuel. And I wouldn't want to be a refueling tanker flying over Russia anyway. You know, it's pretty easy target up there. So anyway, let me just go over some of these things. Now, the bomb that we carried, by the way, the Hiroshima bomb was 12 feet long, 9,000 pounds. Our bomb was 7 feet, and it weighed 2,000 pounds. So we got the thing down to where it was pretty easy to manage and put on. Here's a little something, maybe I read it rather than me trying to memorize this. It says, start out here. On the heels of the U.S.'s reckless demobilization, President Truman, Secretary of Defense Johnson, believing the Air Force strategic bombers with nuclear bombs could cover all of America's defense requirements, and he would trim the fat out of the armed forces. He took a meat axe to the defense budget, and he cut it from $30 billion to $14.2 billion, which drastically reduced funding for the conventional forces, the Army, Navy, USAF, Tactical Air Forces, and the Marines. U.S. conventional fighting forces became a mere shadow what they had been and were grossly inadequate to cover America's post-World War III requirements. General Omar Bradley summed up the Army's capability when he said they couldn't fight their way out of a paper bag. Getting back to Truman, during my career as a pilot in the Air Guard, I also owned a newspaper. I owned a newspaper in Sioux City, Iowa, and one of my guests that came in one day was Harry Truman. Took me out to breakfast. I owned the paper, so he just wanted to butter me up a little bit, I think. And also, by the way, I was on the stage with Kennedy when he made his speech. They put me on the stage. I owned the newspaper, so everybody was buttering me up a little bit. So the paper was doing pretty good until I started running some stories about the New York Mafia may be the ones that were causing a little bit of labor problems. We weren't sure, but they weren't too happy with me. They threatened me constantly to quit publicizing that the Mafia owned the biggest packing plant in the United States, IBP. But I kept running the story, so one night I get a call from a policeman about 3 in the morning. He says, I think you better get down here, your newspaper's on fire. I said, yeah, how long has it been burning? He says, well, we've been sitting here 3 hours watching it. Because I ran a lot of stories about the cops, crooked cops. I had a field day. In Sioux City, we had slot machines and 140 illegal bars and everything else, so the cops were living pretty high on the hog. So anyway, that got me out of business. So went to California, and I better get back in the newspaper business. So I went to Denver, started a paper there. And Billy Graham, he was a friend of the guy that was building shopping centers. They invested some money in it. So they bought my newspaper, give me a hell of a lot of money if I'd be over and do the public relations for their new shopping center. The first covered one, I think, in the United States. So that I did. And then I finally went out to California and got a job running Virgil Pinckney's paper in the Orange Daily News, Anaheim Gazette, in Central, Brawley, and Indio papers. And then the Register come along and bought those papers up, so I had to go either Indio, Brawley, or El Central. I didn't want to do that. So there was a spot open. It was an Air National Guard outfit, like the Blue Angels, only we would go around the cities as Air National Guard kind of recruiting, putting on air shows. We did that. And I was going to be the slot man and the public relations. And of course, we ran into a thing just like we're doing now. We started running out of money. So the first thing they did is grounded our, I can't remember the name of it, but it was like the Blue Angels sort of thing. So they grounded us. So then I went out and got a job working as a newspaper. But I stayed in the flying. I was flying out of Cheyenne, Wyoming. And they had beautiful C121 transport airplanes. And the C121 was a great transport airplane. It wouldn't carry an awful load, but it would fly like an airliner, you know, one with the 3 tails on it. The TWA used those. So we could put a list out. Every month they'd put a list out. We could go all over Europe. We could go to Vietnam. We could go South America, Alaska, where we wanted to go. And so we would sign up. So we got to go wherever we wanted to go. And I had a great job. I had a patriotic boss. So he let me go at least half of the month, which meant I could go to Vietnam, which was 10-hour flight over and back. It was take us 10 days to get over and back and unload and stuff to Vietnam. And we'd go into either Da Nang or Tan Son Nhut in Saigon. I'm sure a lot of you guys have probably been in both of those cities. Let me get back to my notes here a little bit. Here's a little bit going back a little bit to why we got into this is we actually, our conventional forces were dropped to we were a 5th-rate power. We were really demobilizing fast. And the Stalin kept his Army, Air Force, close to World War II fighting strength, towards about 10 million. And he had a lot of World War II combat veterans, so they were used to flying. We had to train a bunch of ours. And I'm going to read this just like I wrote it here. The Soviet threat in Europe couldn't wait for the build-up, and 2 weeks after the Korean War, the 20th Fighter Bomber Wing was given 7 days' notice to deploy down to Langley Field and get ready to get to Europe, because we thought Russia was going to come in any time. And we notified Russia that if they came in to West Berlin, that in 1 day we would level Russia with 75 atomic bombs. And I think they believed that, thank God, so we didn't have to do it. The notice that we had, we didn't have a lot of time to form this thing up. The deployment came because the Strategic Air Command's 12th Strategic Fighter Wing, who had originally been tasked for the deployment, they weren't ready to go. They had nothing but, they had B-17s, B-24s, but not many. So consequently, they could not cover all the targets that needed to be covered in Russia. We needed munitions plants, railroad terminals, all kind of military bases over there that we were set to destroy. And then we had a great colonel. His name was Colonel Dunning. He was our CO. And his problem was he had to take a group of steely-eyed stick and rudder fighter pilots and make them term bomber commanders. And this didn't seem too good to us fighter pilots. And he had to assign many of them to one-way targets. Just about all the targets were one-way. Of course, they didn't broadcast that too much because they wanted our volunteers to stay volunteers. So, and the air fueling tankers that we were starting to build, they would not be available for 2 years. So we see we had a little bit of a problem. on that. So they decided that we ended up with a thing called LABS, Low Altitude Bombing System. And they could set the bomb in the airplane to go off at any distance. Actually, almost the control for the bomb, you would set the altitude that you wanted to go off. So you could set it for 10,000 feet, 1,000. Most of us set it like at 600 feet. And a lot of them we would set so it would go penetrate the earth, and then after so many minutes it would go off. So it gives you time to get out there. After about 1960, they finally came up with a better plan. They would have the bombs go out on a parachute, and that give the pilots time to get away, and the bomb had plenty of time to go down. So basically, I still think they used part of that same deployment. Would you like to talk about a little about some of the things on the screen here? Okay. This is the photograph taken when I graduated as a cadet in Williams Air Force Base. And there was about 500 of us. I was one of the lucky few that got P-38s. So many of them went into bomber pilots and navigators and other jobs in the Air Force. So we really consider ourselves lucky. Now there's the P-38 I had. It was a great airplane. And the funny thing is, it dominated Europe for a long time. But the Germans had a better plane. They had a Focke-Wulf 190 that could keep up and excel the P-38. And the P-38 had one real problem with it. If you got into too big of a dive, it would go into what they call compressibility, and then the controls were worthless and the thing dropped just like a rock. You couldn't do anything about it. So these pilots knew that. So they would be dogfighting with the P-38s, and they just go straight down. P-38s couldn't follow them. So they took all the P-38s, every one of them, out of Europe and put them in the Pacific. And then the P-51s come in, and they were able to take care of the problem we had. And in the Pacific, it was a good airplane because it was long range, single engine flight. If you lost one engine, you could go on the other. So anyway, next flight. And that's me when I was over in Europe as a F84 pilot. And I think I was captain over there, something like that. Okay. And that's just me with my P-38 again. There was a lot of history of that thing, a lot of fun. Now there I am when I'm over in Europe. I was a captain over there. And that was my, and of course, I sat as a captain a lot of years, as a lot of us did. It took a long time to get promoted because everybody was eager to keep going up the ladder. And we were air guards, some of us. And so we were always the last ones to get promoted. So here's the next one. And there's the P-51 I was flying. At the end of World War II, we moved from an island called Attu in the Pacific to a little tiny island, like 2 miles long, 1 mile wide, called Shemya. And then they brought us in all these brand new P-51s. They didn't know what to do with them, I guess, but of course, they finally destroyed just about all of them. And after the war, by the way, maybe you know this, that you could buy a P-51 for about $500. And a lot of the bases, the legions and all these things would buy their P-51s, I mean P-38s. And the P-51s were still out. There's every year they have a reunion of P-51s up near Fresno. I think it's called Das Palace. They have 50 of them coming in. So there's still a lot of them around. There's only 6 P-38s flying in the world. And I think I'm the second or third of May, they've got 4 of the 6 of them that are going to be flying at Chino Air Base. So you get a chance, you might want to go out. They've got quite an air show going. Because they no longer have the Thunderbirds out there. Speaking of the Thunderbirds, I got a call from the guy that's the head of the Thunderbirds once, and he wants to know if I would come down and have breakfast with their flight. They were there to put on an air show for down in Irvine. And I said, why would you want me? I mean, I'm just an old P-51 pilot. And they said every one of us would have given anything to have flown the P-51s. So I went down and had breakfast. I was the center of attention rather than them, which was strange. Okay. Now this is the picture of the, there's 27 of us all together. There are not quite that many in the picture. And only 3 of us are still alive. And we're basically all pretty healthy. I'm 100% disabled, but it's nothing that's going to kill me. So it was quite, one little story about this guy right here. His cousin was Donna Reed out in Hollywood, the actress Donna Reed. It was his cousin, so we would fly out in P-51s and we'd just stay at her house. We didn't think that much of it at the time, but now I begin to think that was quite a deal. So anyway, that's kind of the story on the guys. Most of those guys, a lot of them ended up generals. Some of them are still in the Air Force Reserve. And now there I am, and I'm a fighter pilot over in England. That's my F84 Jeep, where we carried the bomb. And I wish I was still there. That was kind of fun. Now, the name of our squadron was called the 77th Fighter Outfit, and that's the patch that we wore on our jacket. And there's a 55th and a 77th. There's two squadrons they sent over to Europe. So that's about it. Now there are a flight of us, 4 of us. We got the bomb under us on that one. Of course, we don't have the nuclear in this. That's hidden in the United States. It was an airplane built for distance, not speed. Didn't have a lot of speed. I think you had about a 540 miles an hour top speed on the thing. But it would carry a big load, so that's about it. Now here I am. Someone in another F-84 took a picture of me. The unusual thing about this is how close we fly. We flew 3 to 4 feet apart whenever we flew in formation. Now, that might sound like it's too close, but you have to remember, the further you get away, it takes longer as you see the planes are converging, maybe hitting. But when you're 3 feet away, if that thing moves 6 inches, you know you got problems. So consequently, you're right on each other's wings. And it was a little bit frightening when you first learn about it. But even when we did Air Force acrobatics, we stayed about that close. So that's about it. And now here's the workhorse that we had. This was C154. And it was based in, I think it was McGuire in the United States. And it had our 75 atomic bombs stored. We gave them an alert that we only had 24 hours to get them ready, get them loaded, fly across the Atlantic to our base, unload, and put the shapes underneath it and put the bomb in it. So we would keep practicing that, and we didn't always make the 24 hours because it was quite a job loading these bombs right onto the airplane. So, good airplane. And I've got a lot of time in that going to Vietnam. There's a little story about that. I was flying a C-54, went out of Tinker Air Force Base in Oklahoma. Went to Travis, get loaded up. They overloaded us. We were supposed to carry 54,000 pounds, and they put on 58,000 pounds because they needed all the supplies they could get over there. And we left Guam, and we're flying along, fat, dumb, and happy. I think I'm sitting there reading a magazine or something on autopilot, and all of a sudden the left engine blew up on the airplane, which it's not unusual. The unusual part was that the other engine went out, and now we got a fire that burned the skin off the wing. Now we don't have any airlift on that side of the plane, but we still got two good engines. For the next 800 miles, I think we were at Guam, I think we were going to the Philippines, then on to Vietnam. So for the next 800 miles, we had a little bit of a problem. As the airplane kept dropping down, and we had to use the other two engines at full military power, just as high as it would go. So we kept going down, down, down. They sent a C-133 with a great big boat under us to follow us, because we got all kind of manuals out saying, how do we ditch this damn thing? No one's ever done it before. So we got down, as we got lower, we got a little more lift of the ground conditions. And so we finally made it in on full power on the other two engines into the Philippines. And we were there a little over a month, and they sent out some worker specialists and replaced they didn't replace the wing, they replaced the covering on the wing because we had no lift on that side. And since we had already burned out two engines, the other ones were going to go because we ruined them. So they put on 4 new engines, and for about a month, we went home. I called my wife, told her I don't think I'm going to be home for dinner tonight, so don't expect me home. So I stayed over there about a month. They got the plane right. Now there's the bomb, by the way. This is it's called a Mark 7. Now it's 5 times bigger than the Hiroshima bomb. A lot smaller, as I told you. It's about 7 feet, weighs about 2,000 pounds. But it looks pretty massive, it really isn't. And those guys strapped that thing on in a hurry. They really got it fast. And then the back end of it opens up. And I told you they have a little, looks like a little railroad thermos bottle. And it goes up into the bomb bay there. So it's pretty easy. That's about it about the bomb. Now that's me as I retired. And that was in ended up being a command pilot. And still young and skinny. I went out at 123 and I came out at 140, so I didn't gain too much all those years. So anyway, you've all heard about the death spiral. You probably didn't understand what it was, but one of the Kennedy boys died in a death spiral. Anyway, death spiral is about it's the most unwelcome instrument you can have in the Air Force. We would be flying at night, and one night I'm flying at AT-6, and I fell sound asleep. I was about 10,000 feet. I fell sound asleep, and I went into a spin, down, 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 down. And if you know what a death spiral is, you can't recover from it because there's no reference point. So just as I get right near the ground, I see a car off in the distance, Ajo, California. Boy, I got up and I just clipped the top of the cactuses and went on. So that's my story with the pilots that have that kind of a problem. Maybe some of you have experienced that, I don't know. And is there any questions maybe I can answer about my escapades? Yes, sir. How fast it would go, it wouldn't go more than about 540. And it was it wasn't built for speed. It was built for endurance.
No, when you said compressibility, I was thinking how fast would you approach that? What, 450 miles an hour, or where would you reach compressibility?
Well, when you reach compressibility, when you got the airplane in a bad angle. If you get it in a 15-degree down, you could get into compressibility. And of course the Germans knew this, so this is where we had so many problems in Europe on. And that thing, you can't get it out. The rudders, all the controls are just worthless when that happens. That was the main reason we left Europe and went to the Pacific. So, anybody else have a question? Yes, sir.
What was it about the P-38 that you appreciated more than, say, the P-51 or another airplane?
Well, the main thing about it, we had two engines. You want to know about the P-38 over other airplanes. And the P-38 would fly great on one engine. And it didn't have the top speed of a P-51. P-51 would go about 427 miles an hour. And we could not go that fast a period there. I think we went about 425 was our top speed. So, but it was nice to fly. So, yes, sir.
Where exactly was that P-38 base that you went training at? And did you ever have the opportunity to fly into Torrance during your training?
To fly what?
Fly here into Torrance during your...
No, I never. You know, the first plane I flew, by the way, was called a 322. It was a P-38 that had, first ones come out, they had, didn't have counter-rotating props. They had both went the same way. And it would only go about 20,000 feet. We gave 143 of them to France and Great Britain, and they didn't like it either. So finally, we bought them all back. Our government bought them all back and used them as trainer planes. But we did fix the counter-rotating problem because it was really hard to fly when both props were right-hand props. So. But. Anything else? Yes, sir.
Is there anything further you can say about the unit you were in regarding the one-way missions?
Well, everybody, they impressed upon us that don't volunteer if you're not ready to go on a one-way mission. And we started out with several hundred pilots, and then they interviewed them, and a lot of them just didn't want to take that kind of risk. They had families, maybe. They had, anyway, independent pilots, and they just didn't want to take that kind of a chance. So 102 of us volunteered, and of course we figured that Russia's not going to start a war, and they were going to be dead anyway. So what's the difference? We might as well help Russia prevent it. We actually prevented World War III. That never came out, and we should have got some kind of a medal for that, but we never did. So, anyway.
Could you say a little more about that? Having the incident about preventing.
Well, yeah, that was a pretty patriotic war, like World War II. This, as you know now, we're not in patriotic wars, and when we came back to Vietnam, we weren't received pretty well. They never had parades for us, and it was a whole different lifestyle. World War II, everybody was patriotic. Along come the Korean War, not as much patriotic. Along come the Vietnam War, no one's patriotic. And we lost a lot of really good pilots in Vietnam. A lot of my friends were killed. And our government was hamstrung by money problems. They couldn't go ahead and build all these airplanes they needed. So the old pilots were still flying old airplanes. Actually, we started out flying P-51s in Korea, and we gave all of our P-51s to Russia because we were friends in it, kind of. And I think all of them were shot down. So, because the F-86 came out, and then the war turned our tide. Any other questions?
Did the P-38 have one propeller that rotated in the opposite direction?
Does it rotate? Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, one right, one way, left another way. Now, they did make that 322 I was telling you about, and they both went the same way. It made it very difficult to turn, take off. Like the P-51 had a real problem taking off because there was so much torque. You had to almost stand on the rudder to keep the plane going straight. But it was a good airplane, a lot of firepower in it. Of course, the P-38 had a lot of firepower. I had four 50 caliber machines in, one cannon with 150 bullets in it. So it was pretty well armored.
Did that require a special propeller then?
Yeah, it did have special, even if it had special propellers. They really weren't special. They were just made so the engine would turn one way and the other engine would turn the other way. So, any other questions I can answer? Yes, sir.
What did you do in the Korean War?
In the Korean War, that's when we went to England with the atomic bomb. Any other?
All right. What was your first reaction when you had your first experience flying a pure jet versus the propeller airplane?
The reaction after the first jet, I was scared as hell. And they just weren't as simple as the fighter planes were. And not having that prop on there really was a whole new experience. And it was easy to fly, but it took so much more runway to land them and take off on them. So, yeah, yes, sir.
What did your missions in Alaska consist of? To get to Japan?
Our missions in Alaska, we were 1,700 miles from Anchorage, and we're 200 miles from Russia. So we were pretty careful that we didn't upset the Russians by flying over their territory. Oh, thank you.
Thank you for watching Peninsula Seniors Out and About here at the Western Museum of Flight in Torrance. I'm Betty Wheaton. I'll see you next time.